Good morning. We seem to be making some progress in our work. We've covered some good ground. I've had a chance to look at your submissions in the first discussion forum and the essays. I posted an announcement yesterday in which I made some comments about some general comments about the things that you said in the discussion post and in your essays. And a point that I did make there that I want to make again is I don't think I've ever seen such a bunch or met such a bunch of pessimistic people in my life. I'm pessimistic. And I think we're going to have to work pretty hard to deal with this particular issue. Starting in that way, I guess I just want to say one thing today. Remember, we're not perfect human beings. We just aren't perfect. We don't do the right thing very often. And the laws and the rules exist to deal with the times when we don't do the right and the perfect things. The laws exist for us the laws provide a context, they provide rules that force us to behave with each other in certain kinds of ways. Human nature, being what it is, will always try to use those rules for our own particular advantage and get what we want. We can't expect politics to work perfectly, and we can't expect the rules to work perfectly, because the rules have to be applied. And once you start applying the rules to concrete situations, if there are 50 people involved, you get 52 different concrete situations, and that's the challenge. Politics is the process by which we all compete for what we can get out of this. So far, in our great and difficult moments, we do pretty well, don't we? I think we can be proud of what's happening now in Houston for all those poor people who are hurting. And have you noticed no one's screaming at Donald Trump, and Mitch McConnell isn't screaming at so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and we're doing the right thing. I can remember a little kid hearing my parents talk about a thing called World War II. I think we did pretty well there. There are many, many examples. I guess what I'm trying to convey is certainly not anger or disappointment at what you said in your essays and in the discussion forum. I thought what you said was excellent, and I really appreciated the way you opened up and spoke, if I may use the word, from the heart. And I know that's going to continue, and I'm looking forward to that. Well, I did want to say a word about certain pessimism, and say a word about expectations that we might have, which is probably a good way to get into our discussion for today, which deals with civil liberties and civil rights. We frequently use those terms interchangeably, but in fact they really aren't the same. And I want to begin by distinguishing the two. Civil liberties refer to basic political freedoms that protect citizens from government abuses of power and authority. Civil liberties are basic political freedoms that protect citizens from government abuse of power or authority. Put differently, civil liberties are a set of rules that limit the government's authority to interfere in certain areas of citizens' activity. Civil liberties are rules that limit the government's authority to interfere in certain areas of citizen activity. It's about freedom. Civil liberties refer basically to freedom and to freedoms. Civil rights, on the other hand, are very close, yet there's a subtle, very nuanced kind of difference. Civil rights refer to protections for citizens and groups who might, for some reason, such as race, gender, sexual orientation, whatever, be deprived of their civil liberties. So it's about equality. Civil liberties about freedom, civil rights about equality. I just said something I talked about, about civil rights, to protections for citizens or groups. The or groups part of that is something that is new in my lifetime. You have grown up with it, and it doesn't seem to be the least bit unusual. For me, it is. Because when I was your age, we didn't think of groups as having civil rights. The very phrase, civil rights movement, began in the 1950s. The civil rights movement was a grating phrase. It woke us all up to say, yeah, you know, rights do apply to groups as well as to individuals. And so I think you need to understand, and I'll try to convey this, that the notion of rights being applied to groups of individuals is a relatively new thing. And you know, it opens up a long and difficult road, doesn't it? Because how many different groups do we have? And how many different groups can we find? And there's always a group, and there's always a group identity that can be applied to this area of civil rights. And one of the challenges is to come up with what is a meaningful definition of a group. And unfortunately, or fortunately, if a group can swing votes, if a group can have influence, it's going to be a group. And that's politics. That's politics. So, civil liberties, civil rights. Civil liberties are about freedom. Civil rights are about equality. Civil liberties, let's talk about that in more detail. Civil liberties are found throughout the whole Constitution, of course, but civil liberties are focused generally on the notion of, we see it in the Bill of Rights and in the Equal Protections Clause of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. In other words, if you wish to understand the theoretical and actual basis for the American version of civil rights, or civil liberties, I'm sorry, look at the Bill of Rights and look at the 14th Amendment, as I'm going to invite you to do in just a moment. These liberties restrict the things that government can do to us. Civil rights offer protection, as I said, from discrimination. Civil rights are based essentially upon, well, again, the whole Constitution, but particularly upon the equal protection of the laws clause of the 14th Amendment. So what am I saying? It behooves you, I would recommend, if it were in my power to compel you, which I just might with an examination or assignment, I would compel you to know the 14th Amendment cold, and this is the fifth time I've said it, the Bill of Rights, absolutely cold. We're going to work at that in some detail in just a moment. Having said, made all these distinctions, I hope I won't confuse you too much if I say just a couple of things first. Liberty, equality. In many respects, they come down to the same kind of thing. And they raise this specter. We have positive positive liberties, that is, freedom to do certain things. And then we have what we might call negative liberties, which involve freedom from interference in things that we do. Again, civil liberties are positive. Freedom to do certain things. Civil rights refer to more negative liberties. Freedom from certain things. And so when we talk about liberties and rights, there's a larger question that I know I've mentioned before, but which I want to mention again today. And this is the question. Are liberties and rights conferred to us by the Constitution, the state, or the government? Are they conferred to us, or do they exist prior to the state, to the government, to the Constitution? If you said they exist prior, you're right. You're also very, very American. Now let me be frank. There are those who say no. We have Hitlers, we have Stalins, we have Kim Jong-uns, and so on, who say no, the state is first, and the state does various things. And that's just in its most insidious, most difficult times. I can remember having a conversation with a German friend once, and I used the word German not in any Nazi sense at all, but they couldn't quite understand how the United States government, well, they couldn't understand how anybody could question the right of the American government to regulate to regulate the airwaves, to regulate access, to grant channel licenses to broadcast, not counted in it. Of course the government owns the airwaves. Of course it does. Now, this is from one great believer in democracy to another believer in democracy. My point in mentioning this is twofold. First, is to underscore the point that we as Americans believe our rights and liberties are first and foremost in everything. That is what we believe. Philosophers argue that this may be true or may not be true, and they get into big arguments about that. And history is littered with the corpses of people who fought over these kinds of issues. My point is that from an American perspective, one of the things that makes American politics American is the fact it proceeds from the assumption, just the visceral assumption, the knowledge, the unquestioned belief that rights and liberties exist prior to government. I hope I haven't beaten that to death, but I also hope that you've taken it on board. Let me take it one step deeper, because I don't think I have done this before, and it is something you need to know. I think you may have heard me talk about something called the social contract theory, and you heard me talk about contract theory as opposed to conflict theory. Because we have the view that rights and liberties exist before government and so forth, our notion of government is free individuals coming together to form an agreement known as a constitution about how we are going to order our political lives. Did I say that clearly? I hope I did. Free individuals with rights and all of those things coming together to form a contract or to form a set of rules that will govern the ways in which we compete so that competition will not result in destruction. It's a way of regulating human behavior. Other forms, in communism, for example, they want human destruction. They want to destroy social classes and things like that. That's a very, very important difference. We can say that American politics is based on social contract theory. Two, we can say that we are a communitarian nation. This is a very, very important aspect of what makes us what we are. Now, let me be more specific about this. I said civil liberties are found in the Constitution as a whole. Indeed, the document is an attempt to institutionalize civil liberties. Does that make any sense? The Constitution is a way, is a means, contract. It's a means of turning these abstract concepts of right and wrong and liberty into procedures, into rules that enable us to make decisions that are respectful of the rights that we have. Now, I hope I put that across in a way. All I can do is repeat it in a louder tone of voice, which doesn't really help very much. But I'm going to assume that you got that. And so, we look at the Bill of Rights. We look at the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the so-called Civil War amendments, plus other places. What I'd like you to do now, please, is take your texts and turn to the appendix, Appendix 11. The page number is listed as A11. And on it, you'll see the first 12 amendments to the Constitution. That's the Bill of Rights plus 2. We're interested, frankly, in 10. And I feel so strongly about it that I want to go through it with you and be certain that we understand what is being said. And yes, you're going to be examined on this. The First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof. We have freedom of the press and speech, and we have the right to assemble peaceably to petition the government or grievances. That exists prior to any government. Second, we have a right to bear arms. Now, I know there is a clause in there that says a militia being necessary and blah, 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 and people may argue over this. The fact of the matter is that at present, the Supreme Court of the United States has interpreted that to mean, this is important, that we have a right to bear arms. Free carry, or open carry, concealed carry, all of that stuff, we can do that. Third, the government can't quarter soldiers, can't come up to us and say, we're going to put this platoon of troops in your house at your expense so they can go and fight the French up in Canada. Can't do that. Fourth, there's a prohibition against unreasonable search and seizures. Nobody can come into, no representative of government can come into your house and search the premises without a warrant. That means they must go to a judge and say, Judge, we think there is reason to believe that materials X, Y, and Z may be found in the vicinity of rooms L, M, and R in a certain address at a certain street at a certain time. And we request permission to take control of those areas so that we can search for these things. And the judge makes a decision about the warrant. I hope I'm not turning you all into ignorant lawyers. Because between all of us, I may just be teaching us enough to be dangerous, but I do want you to get the idea. We can't be brought to trial. This is the fifth, unless we are indicted by a grand jury, in most cases. A grand jury means a group of people, anonymous, who sit and listen to a bunch of facts presented, usually by the government. And they say, yeah, there's a case here. This seems to require additional or further examination or further work. We are indicted. That's before you ever get to trial. In other words, that's to prevent people just from making things up. You can't be tried twice for the same crime. If you're tried, found guilty, that's it. And the government can say, uh-oh, we made a mistake. So, no, can't do that. You can only be tried once for the same offense. And of course, everyone knows taking the fifth means you can't be forced to bear witness against yourself. They can't force you. Nobody can force you to say that you did or you didn't. The sixth talks about a speedy and fair trial. The seventh guarantees trial by jury in most cases, especially in civil cases. The Eighth Amendment talks about excessive bail and cruel and inhuman punishment. You can't be hit with an outrageous sum of money for bail. I've never had to put up bail, but everything I've read about it, back in the old days, $500 was a lot of money for bail. Now you see $5 million for bail. I don't know what this says about inflation or anything else. I don't think it's a question of oppression, but it is. The government cannot use the imposition of a large amount of money to impede your freedom as you work